everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Psychiatry Rewritten. My name is Lane. Quick test. If I say, don't think about stabbing your best friend, what popped into your head? A knife? A flash image? Now, imagine your brain latches onto that and says, what does it mean that I had that thought? Am I dangerous? I have to make sure. That's OCD. Not perfectionism, not quirky cleaning. It's not organization. It's a disorder of maybe, where intrusive thoughts crash in and compulsions become rituals to buy yourself a moment of certainty. Today, I'm going to talk about what OCD actually looks like in real life, because I've been thinking about it a lot. The taboo thoughts no one admits, the silent rituals no one sees, and how treatment works when reassurance and checking stop working. OCD isn't about being clean. It's about being sure. So for OCD, let's start by clearing up some rumors, some myths. Some of the biggest is that OCD means you're neat, organized, or like cleaning. The reality is the true core of OCD is intrusive doubt and compulsions to get rid of it. Neatness is just one possible compulsion. The second myth is that intrusive thoughts mean you secretly want to do that thing. In OCD, the thoughts are ego dystonic, meaning they go against your values. That's exactly why they're so distressing. Another myth is that reassurance helps, when in reality, reassurance gives relief for a few minutes or hours, but it actually strengthens the cycle. It doesn't make it better. And it makes the anxiety come back even worse later. OCD isn't about being clean and organized. It's about being sure. And behind the scenes, the anxiety with OCD works like this. Think of it as a certainty addiction. The cycle goes like this. There's a trigger that causes a doubt spike that leads to catastrophic meaning. And then there's a compulsion, which leads to brief relief, but then it comes back as even stronger doubt later. And that's a cycle that continues, and it's like a loop. Sometimes it's about fear of catastrophe, but often it's about an unbearable incompleteness. It's something that we call just right anxiety. So think of every compulsion like buying certainty or buying reassurance on credit. You do feel relief right now in this moment, but the interest comes back tomorrow, even larger. And people often only hear about contamination OCD, but OCD wears many hats. For example, there's harm OCD, which is when someone worries, like, what if I suddenly stab someone? So that person may avoid knives, may check for the intent in themselves if they do want to harm somebody, if they would, if they could, are they capable of stabbing somebody? And then asking for reassurance. There's also sexual taboo, sexual OCD and taboo OCD, which is like intrusive thoughts about kids or family. And those people might avoid hugs or check for arousal with themselves and spiral in guilt. And then there's scrupulosity, which is praying until it feels perfect, or redoing confessions, or avoiding worship for fear of blasphemy. And then there's moral contamination, which could be like, if I touch this political flyer, I'll be tainted. Or if I'm scrolling Facebook and I see a certain video, then I'm tainted. If I'm basically exposed to certain materials, then it could ruin my morals. There's also relationship OCD, which is, do I really love my partner? And that leads to endless reassurance loops. There's also false memory OCD, which is one that I've seen a lot, which is where there's hours spent reviewing whether they cheated, stole, or harmed someone that they didn't actually harm. And then there's also sensory motor OCD, which is hyper awareness of breathing, blinking, and swallowing, or being scared that you can't, or that you're doing it too much. And then again, the just right OCD, which can be adjusting objects or maybe rereading material over and over again until it feels just right. Or just redoing. The point is, you redo that certain thing until the tension breaks. And then you can move on. One of the most confusing things about OCD is how compulsions work. So, from the outside, they look like habits or quirks. But from the inside, they're negotiations with your own anxiety. So again, the loop is, an intrusive thought sparks doubt or tension in your brain. And then the brain screams, something is wrong, fix it. And then the compulsion shows up as the only way to feel relief. So the compulsion could be flipping the light switch 7 times until it feels good and you can move on. And the anxiety breaks and you're not anxious about it anymore. For some people, the compulsion is very clear, which could be washing their hands, checking the lights, checking the locks on the doors, or just repeating a certain action until it feels good. But for others, it's silent. It can just be mentally reviewing conversations, praying until the words sound right, and replaying conversations in their head to be sure they didn't offend anyone. So maybe at the end of the day, not at the end of the day, all day. So maybe after each conversation, they replay it over and over to make sure they hadn't said something wrong. And then there's the piece. This isn't about danger at all. It's about completion. Maybe a shirt seam doesn't feel lined up, or a word doesn't feel said correctly. A gesture doesn't feel finished. The ritual continues until the tension finally drops, and only then can the brain move on. But the tragedy is that relief never lasts. Every time the ritual gives a moment of calm and peace, it teaches the brain that compulsions are the only way out. So the next time, the urge is even stronger. And the bar for just right gets even higher. And the ritual goes from minutes to hours. And now it's interfering with work. It's interfering with relationships. It's interfering with sleep. It's interfering with your punctuality, where you're getting places late. That's why treatment focuses on breaking the ritual cycle. Not because people don't want to stop, but because OCD convinces them they can't survive the wrongness. Learning to sit with the discomfort instead of chasing that fleeting sense of rightness is what rewires the system. And it's difficult. It's hard, but it's very achievable. One of the most misunderstood parts of OCD is how rituals and compulsions actually work. Because they can look like quirks or even overreactions, but really they're just survival strategies. Researchers also call this a sensory phenomenon because the discomfort can feel almost physical, like an itch that won't go away until the ritual scratches it. The problem is that relief is always temporary. Each ritual reinforces the brain's beliefs that compulsions are the only way to feel safe or complete. Over time, like I said, the bar just gets higher, the ritual gets longer, and life just starts to kind of shrink around them. Take a back seat. And that's why treatment like ERP focuses not just on resisting the obvious behaviors, but also on breaking the cycle of just right compulsions. The goal isn't to feel right. It's to learn that you can tolerate wrongness, incompleteness, and uncertainty, and still keep living in your values. Intrusive thoughts also, this is something important. Intrusive thoughts do not equal risk. Risk is judged by intent, planning, and capability, not by thought content. The OCD is often misdiagnosed. So there's OCD versus OCPD, which is a personality disorder. And OCD is when you have tormenting intrusions and rituals you don't want, whereas OCPD is rigid perfectionism that feels right. And then OCD versus generalized anxiety disorder. Generalized anxiety disorder worries are more broad and more verbalized, whereas obsessive compulsive disorder doubts are specific and ritualized. There's also OCD versus psychosis. OCD usually comes with insight. They make sense. It's consistent with reality. They might say, I know this doesn't make sense. I know this isn't rational, but I can't stop. And then there's OCD versus autism. Autistic routines bring predictability, though. OCD rituals are about preventing threat or guilt. OCD versus tics, like in Tourette's or tic disorders. Tics are sudden motor urges. involuntary movements. Compulsions are rule-driven attempts to complete certain actions in order to prevent or stop something bad from happening. It's like step on a crack, break your mother's back. That old saying. So treatment for OCD can look like a couple of different things, but the gold standard is ERP, which is exposure and response prevention. So exposure means deliberately facing the fear. So touching the contaminated doorknob or touching the contaminated political flyer or writing the feared thought down. Response prevention means not doing the ritual afterward and instead riding the anxiety wave until it naturally falls. So sitting in that discomfort, which can be difficult. And the mantra becomes maybe, maybe not. Recovery isn't about proving safety. It's about learning to live without the certainty. Because it's impossible to live in full certainty. Because none of us can predict what tomorrow can bring, what the future will bring. So how ERP looks in real life, they incorporate methods like building fear ladders. So start in the middle. Stay in the situation until the anxiety drops on its own. Sometimes you can use imaginal exposures for taboo thoughts. Often, loved ones or family members accidentally feed OCD by offering reassurance. The better script for them, for you, is, I love you. I won't do reassurance, but I'll sit with you while you ride this out until you feel better, until the anxiety goes away, until the urge goes away. Medications that are used are SSRIs at higher doses and longer trials. Luvox is the one that I know is approved for, Luvox is one that I know is approved for OCD. Clomipramine is used if SSRIs fail. And sometimes antipsychotic augmentation in severe cases, especially for the anxiety. New things on the horizon, new treatments on the horizon are things like TMS and deep brain stimulation for the hardest to treat OCD. But that can be controversial. So people with OCD often say, I filmed the stove off just to prove it later. Or, I won't hold babies. I don't trust my brain. Or, I asked him, are we okay? So many times that then my partner wasn't okay. I prayed 20 times until it felt right. I reread one sentence until it clicked and lost hours. I had to flip the light switch on and off 23 times before I could leave for work. I have to wash my hands 14 times before, during, and after each meal. I thought that I hit somebody on my motorcycle and then left the scene, so I drive back every day to make sure that they're not there on the road. The myth about OCD surrounding the treatment is that ERP forces you to do dangerous things. Exposures are designed to be safe, controlled, and voluntary. They're not meant to make you do dangerous things. Another myth is if I don't ritualize, something bad will happen. But the truth is, that's the OCD lie. That's the lie your brain, the OCD is telling your brain. Learning to sit with it shows your brain the alarm can ring without there being a fire. It's kind of sitting in it and letting yourself feel it and then proving to yourself that no, nothing bad is going to happen. That's how you do finally rewire your brain and move through. Another thing that I want to make really clear, intrusive harm or sexual thoughts do not mean intent. But if someone has an active plan, active intent, or feels out of control, that's a crisis. That's a different conversation. That's not ERP homework. That's an emergency. So that's different. OCD, though, is a liar that whispers, "You're not safe until you're certain." But the cure for OCD behavior isn't chasing certainty. It's simply learning to live without it. To say, maybe, maybe not. To feel the anxiety and still live your values anyway. Part of what makes OCD so hard to identify is how invisible it can be. People picture someone washing their hands raw or flipping a light switch 50 times, but the truth is, many people with OCD mask their symptoms. They've gotten so good at taking things apart and putting them back together at work in order to still keep their job, but their rituals that you wouldn't even know that it's going on in their lives. They find ways to ritualize, or they avoid triggers entirely so that they don't have the urge to ritualize. They can be high functioning, successful, admired, while inside of their minds, they are on a battleground of doubt, guilt, and endless thought loops and cycles of compulsions and rituals. And that's why OCD is so often missed and why recovery can feel so daunting. It's not about breaking an obvious habit, not at all. It's so much deeper than that. It's about retraining a brain that's addicted to certainty, addicted to reassurance. That takes courage, persistence, and often professional help. Because OCD demands 100%. Recovery is learning that maybe can actually be enough. Maybe can actually be enough. And that you can live a full, meaningful, content life, not once the thoughts are gone, but once you stop letting them run the show. That's all for today. Thank you for being here. The next topic, I want to talk about inflammation-induced psychosis, that kind of thing. So I hope you join me for the next episode. Bye.